Let me just sort of dive in and say what we're going to do today. If you didn't see the video before, last week, I just taught practitioner. I do teach all the time, but in this capacity, I'm just sharing from one to another. I'm not affiliated with IFM, other than I've gone through all their courses, sat for the exam, submitted the case review, all of those things. And I'm not affiliated with any of these labs or supplement companies. I'm just sharing what I've used and what I'm doing. So that's where that's coming from. And last week, I taught how to read the Dutch test. It's urine metabolite test for comprehensive hormone. So Dutch is an acronym, and how to use the treatment guide. And then I emailed that out. So if you didn't get it, I'm happy to send it again or share the links. And I sent a couple other things. So that was last week, and you're welcome to watch it. I gave a private YouTube link so you can watch it on YouTube if you're interested. Tried to go through the markers in somewhat detail, and then that lab actually has pretty good educational videos. And then what we're going to do this week, some people expressed interest, and I thought it would be sort of fun to talk shop, is a couple of patients I had and looking at sort of some labs and cross comparing it. So, and as for me, I'm Dr. Zachary. My clinic is Body Love Cafe. All my practitioner work is through Functional Medicine Academy and on DocZachary.com. I love to teach. It's my favorite thing. And you can, I send a communication guide out from McGraw-Hill that had been published out of New York, and you can read a little bit about my story if it's interesting to you. It's in there. Okay, so hopefully you have this little snapshot here, summary drivers of hormonal imbalance. I might save this for later. We might bring it back in. Otherwise, here's what we're going to do. So hopefully you see a number of screens, and that's the interpretive guide. I actually pulled up 2 patients. So we'll start with patient number 1. So hopefully you can hear okay, and we're zoomed in enough. Okay, so let me give you just a little bit of background, just generic, because I am trying to record this. This is a female in her 30s. She's a mom. She's working. Her initial complaints were extreme hair loss, anemia, hormone imbalance by her report, multiple UTIs, yeast infections, fatigue, anxiety, food cravings, itchy ears and eyes, constipation, pain, achy joints, feeling restless, brain fog, poor concentration, and she had light colored stools. So that's what she came in with. So the labs we ended up doing were Dutch. So we'll go over that. I'm still letting people in. So you haven't missed much. We're just starting. So here's what we have. We have the Dutch test. Let me get to the beginning. All the patient data is blacked out. So we have the Dutch test. We'll go through that. We have an allergy test, and I'll tell you a little bit about this. I wasn't always a big fan of doing allergy tests because I always felt like patients wanted it more, but most of them had gut health issues going on, high histamine, leaky gut, intestinal barrier issues. And so I felt like it was sort of a waste of their money to just test IgG allergies versus doing some of that work first and then seeing if there was anything left. Like there was more value to sort of time and order this a little bit differently. This used to be Dunwoody Lab. This is Precision Point now. I like this test because it's not just IgG, but they do the C3D, the complement antigen marker. So we'll talk a bit about that. They do IgG4 and they do IgE. So I'm a bigger fan now of this test. This is the intestinal barrier test that I used. I've used many of them, so I'll tell you why I like this and some of the markers I look for. And then the GI map. So that's what we had for this specific patient. So let's go through her Dutch first. And this is the treatment guide. If someone else can also tell me that you're seeing both sides of the screen, and if I'm zoomed in enough, because if I need to zoom in more, I'm happy to do it. But I just want to make sure you can see the face of the Dutch and see the treatment guide. I went through the treatment guide in detail last time, so I'm going to sort of skip to the areas. This is the little table of contents. Thank you so much for the feedback. This is the little table of contents here. Sorry, I have to keep an eye on people still coming in. And we're going to skip ahead to the hormone. So she is a cycling female. So we're going to jump down to page 11 of this grid. This is what I sent out to everyone. One of the things I sent out. And this is just the summary report on the left. So you can see her estradiol E2. We'll actually look at all the estrogens, but this E2 is quite low for a cycling female. And remember, this is a luteal phase, so progesterone, we do expect it to be higher, but this still is a relative imbalance. Testosterone, fine. But the way to look at it is you can see her progesterone's 12.3. So on this treatment guide, you go on the left column, 3 rows down, it's greater than 6, which is normal. And sometimes people will be like an 8 or a 10, and they might have symptoms of low progesterone. So you can see here in this box, remind me if you guys see my mouse when I move it, because I'm using it like a pointer. I'm just not sure if I'm the only one who could see it. But I'm the 3rd row down and I'm 3 columns across. And you can see, consider hormone replacement therapy if progesterone is below 12. So sometimes someone's technically in normal, but their symptoms are, they have sort of a subclinical low progesterone. Anyway, she's fine. She's above 12, but her estradiol is very low. So then you go in the columns, and she's right about that very low E2 to modestly low. I mean, she's 0.72, so she's really hovering. So you can look at both. With the normal progesterone and the very low E2, the lab suggesting possibly doing cycle mapping, so mapping throughout the whole month. I chose not to do that with her. Seek the underlying cause always. That's a functional medicine way. And in this category, if she had low symptoms, consider vitamin E, phytoestrogen. So this is how you read the treatment guide. You see a little footnote 3. Some of the phytoestrogens, they're recommending dong quai, hops, isoflavonones, red clover, aniseed, black cohosh. So I'll show a blend I ended up using. Address EDCs with the footnote number 4. You can see down here, EDC stands for endocrine disrupting chemicals. That was not the case for her, but for some people that will be quite significant. And addressing that, because that can impact the low E2, inflammation, evaluating phase 1, phase 2 detoxification in the liver, and possibly consider cycle mapping. So that's just a quick little overview of the summary page and how to use that grid. So I know some of you are just hopping in. We're just diving in. This is patient number 1 showing the overview of her Dutch. This is page 1 of the Dutch. And then you can see also in the summary, we'll look at it in more detail, but here's her daily free cortisol pattern. And the Dutch is nice that they give daily free cortisol and cortisone, which is helpful for mapping out these fluctuations throughout the 24-hour cycle. But that's a very small, like less 1% of the cortisol in the bloodstream or circulating cortisol. So we also have metabolized cortisol, which is going to give you a better idea of overall production, and total DHEA. So she's low normal on both of those, not necessarily something to be concerned about unless she has a lot of symptoms. And she did report a fair amount of fatigue. She's got this hair loss going on. Her experience, and she's a healthcare practitioner, her experience of a hormone imbalance. So I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to it. And then you can see she's low normal for her daily free cortisol pattern. And in the afternoon, she has quite a dip. And at night, she increases. We want the cortisol to be the highest in the morning. And when you read this, by the way, don't get lured into thinking that waking is morning. The waking finding is really the overnight pattern. And as you know, overnight, I'm always talking to patients about this, you know, they're sleeping, but there's still a lot of repair going on. Their body still needs glucose, needs energy. And depending on when they ate their last meal and how efficient their body is, and if they have any blood sugar balancing issues, they're going to use up their fuel. And then they're going to grab stored glucose in the form of glycogen from the liver. Part of that signaling process comes from the adrenals. And so a lot of people who say they wake up at night over and over again, I just had a patient this week talking about it, you know, I have something's wrong with how I pee, she said, because I have to wake up at night over and over again and pee, but it's not happening at all during the day. And she's not drinking water before bed. There's no changes in urine stream, no changes in urine in the color. There was no kidney pain. There was no sense of urgency. There was no burning. It just didn't seem like a urinary issue. And I was trying to explain to her that, you know, often you'll wake up and then it's just sort of natural. We wake up at night, we go pee, and then they think it's a peeing problem when really it can be a blood sugar or a liver issue or an adrenal issue, and we need to work on that, and then the peeing problem goes away. So anyway, this overnight value, waking value number A, really represents what's happening overnight. Morning B is the morning value. And that's when we want the cortisol to be the highest, the get up and go. So she's a little low normal and she does feel some fatigue then. Afternoon, too much of a dip. This is, you know, Starbucks knows people having this dip in the afternoon. That's when they're racing for their sugary coffees and, you know, donuts and whatever. And then at night, that's when Facebook knows we're all on Facebook too late because, you know, these moms are fatigued or the healthcare practitioners are exhausted from such a hard day of work. And then they're having this cortisol spike at night and getting all ramped up again. And we want the cortisol lowest at night and the melatonin highest at night. So that's what we're looking for. All right, so that's a quick snapshot, page 1. If there's any questions, just type it in the box and let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going. So page 2 are her actual numbers for her sex hormones. Page 3 is a pictorial view of it. And that's the view I use to describe it to them. So in the top right-hand corner, progesterone, you see the total progesterone circle. These are like gas gauges that you read. So from yellow star to yellow star is the normal range for a cycling female. And then below that, you're getting into perimenopause. The purple box is the post menopausal range. And the circle is empty because we don't actually measure progesterone in urine, but we measure the metabolites. And then the lab's been able to extrapolate and do research and compare back. And that's how on page 1, you are getting a progesterone total. And you can see it's a serum equivalent calculated based on the urine pregnanediol. So that's how they're doing the math. So you can see the progesterone metabolites. She looks fine. And then this corner here on the left are the androgens. So DHEA-S for sulfate. She's very low normal. Testosterone looks fine. Remember, testosterone will use the enzyme aromatase and form estrogen. So considering DHEA supplementation is an option, which I think they have listed here somewhere. It might be another section. I'll show it to you when we scroll through there. Okay, and then her testosterone metabolites, fine. If these are relatively high compared to DHEA sulfate, by the way, which they are slightly, particularly the endosterone, it's a sign of inflammation. And then this little gas gauge here, or fan gauge, this is 5A reductase. When you start seeing it tip over to the 5-alpha instead of 5-beta, it's a preference for making DHT. So it's that stronger, more androgenic form of testosterone. So keep that in mind when you're choosing supplementation, or if you're using bioidenticals, or if you're a prescribing doc. The whole advantage of this test is to see the metabolism and the patterns. And so for her, what did we end up doing? I did actually use some DHEA with her. I talked to her about it because I felt like there was enough room, that her DHEA was low enough that I could start her on a low dose, and I did 5 milligrams, so very low. But just keeping in mind, it could increase testosterone. I'm looking to increase estrogen. So I'm hoping it's going to go downstream, but I wanted her to watch and she had very low libido also. So there was other reasons for this, but I wanted her to watch that she didn't end up feeling irritable, or, getting acne around her chin, or greasy hair, right? Signs that it was just getting sort of trapped in this pattern, or going farther down that 5-alpha preference. So that's why I did very low dose, and that was not my primary remedy, was to step in there. Okay, and then here's estrogen. You can see part of the metabolism pattern. We've got E1, E2, and E3. She's low across the board. And again, one of the advantages to this test is to see how it's metabolized. So down the green pathway is the protective pathway. That is the 2-hydroxy E1 pathway. So that's what we're looking for. And you can see it represented in this pie chart here on the right. And usually the green pathway will take up 3/4 to 80% of the pie chart. So just even from a quick glance, it catches your eye. Ooh, something's off. And she's higher. See how it says patient percentile? She's 53% down that 2-hydroxy pathway. We want her between 60 to 80. Most people are 70 to 80. And then the lab lovingly puts it in red here to go down the 4-hydroxy. We have research that shows 4-hydroxy is greater risk for oxidative stress. Also, as women approach menopause, those who prefer that pathway tend to have more negative menopausal experiences. So if you're doing this in a woman who's cycling, getting towards perimenopausal, you can use it a bit like predictive, as far as someone who might need a little bit more support, or maybe a patient education tool, saying like, you're not going to have a fun time. So let's get weight normalized. Let's do some adrenal work now, so menopause is not a nightmare for you later. But in their mind, that's what they care about, right? Not having miserable hot flashes, but the oxidative stress is the more important issue. So you can see down this red pathway forming the reactive quinone, and it can damage DNA. Glutathione can be very helpful. So when you see this path increased, you may want to add that. And so we only want about 7 to 11% through that 4-hydroxy pathway, and she's at 26%. So if you look here, I'm trying to think of where the notes are. I just want you to be able to find it, so it's not like me just saying it. Come on, little guy. There you go. So let's just look at this real quick. Not the stress. We'll get there. We're going to do the cortisol part of it next. Zoom in a bit more. Okay, so here we start getting into progesterone and estrogen. You can start seeing some of the symptoms. So low estrogen, insomnia she's definitely having, low sex drive she's having, some mood issues she's having, joint pain and skin issues. She's definitely having all of those. This just gives you a little bit more information. Here's a little part talking about poor phase 1 metabolism that favors, so this is page 9 of the treatment guide, favors the 4-hydroxy over the 2-hydroxy. So that's what we're talking about here on the left. So there's a little bit of notes there. And there's a part like you might want to use DIM and glutathione and sulforaphane and all of these things. And I think they're listed here for you, so you don't have to think about it. This page is helpful, page 10. This says getting at some of the root causes, so low estrogen and progesterone. Of course, doing the sample on the wrong day is going to throw it off. The sample should be taken between day 19 to 22. We just tell patients 19 to 21. It was done correct, so we're able to rule that out. Let's see. This was the one I was on here. Here we go. If poor phase 1 metabolism, DIM, I3C, using those, glutathione, NAC, Brassica family. I just wanted you to see that the resources were here. Here, when estrogen's elevated, talking about sulforaphane. Okay, good. And here is a footnote number 5 for methylation support. So you can see some of the methylation support. All right, so now you know where to find it. Okay, so that was one of the things we were considering for her. And then this is a calculated value on the bottom left. You can see the 2-hydroxy is low, and then they're calculating how much of 2-methoxy that's preferred. For those of you that took the recent IFMCP test, that was on there. And so because this is lower than here, this ratio is off, this is a calculated value. And so it's determined that she has low methylation activity. That does not look at the entire methylation cycle or 1-carbon metabolism. That's a different test, which I didn't do on her. And I had mentioned, depending on results, if we don't get the results we want with this first round, we might want to bring that in for later. And then it's possible she has a COMT SNP. I don't know because we haven't tested it. This, even though this is evidence of low methylation in this example, this does not mean for sure that she has a COMT SNP. So I didn't make my recommendations until I went through all of the other tests. So I'm just going to tell them as you go along, but my recommendations were based on looking at everything together. So what I sort of summarized from the hormone perspective was low estrogen relative to progesterone for a cycling female. Consider FemGuard. So that's what I was recommending, Designs for Health, FemGuard. So that's not bioidentical, but it has some herbal ingredients in it that's going to sort of naturally bring things in balance. If we can do it at that level, then great. If not, I was going to recommend some supplemental level bioidentical estradiol, and a little progesterone, just so it wasn't unopposed estrogen. And again, just the bioidentical form. But we're starting with FemGuard Balance Plus and the 5 milligrams of DHEA. I talked to her a bit about the phase 1, phase 2 liver support, and there's DIM in the FemGuard. That's part of why I went with it. It has a little calcium deglucarate in it. So I was just getting several things at a low level in FemGuard Balance, and that's why I went for that instead of having to give multiple bottles, because we had a complete history, intake, 4 tests. There was a lot of things we were covering. So I was trying to not have her have to have a suitcase for her supplements. I discussed methylation being low, what that meant. And then depending on initial improvement, about a month, 6 weeks in, we may consider additional liver support, adding a methyl donor, or testing, full 1-carbon metabolism, COMT if needed. So that's sort of where we were up to this page. And I'll recap what I gave a bit more, but let's keep going through the test. So the next page are the numbers for cortisol, her adrenal hormones and the metabolites. And then the next page is the picture view. And that's what I use to describe for the patient because it has more impact. I talked to them a bit about hypothalamus, pituitary, and the significance and the role these glands play in communicating with the thyroid, adrenal, and ovary sex, gonads. Melatonin was fine. DHEA production was fine, so it's not like she necessarily needed that supplement, but she was so stressed, so fatigued, the cortisol being elevated at night, and I wanted to see if I could use that to go downstream to help boost the estrogen before doing the bioidentical. I felt like I had enough wiggle room to do that. So that's why I chose that. She doesn't have an overproduction of cortisol, but you can see from the metabolites that she does prefer the active cortisol. And let's say she preferred the inactive cortisone. You could choose something like in the morning, if she was feeling really tired, or this afternoon where she's so sluggish, you could choose a supplement that had licorice in it. A good one I like, Adrenatone by Designs for Health. There's other ones out there, obviously, but if you get a glycerized licorice, then it doesn't increase cortisol, but it turns off the enzyme that breaks it down. So if there was this preference for cortisone, you'd be able to keep a more active cortisol. We obviously did not need that in this case. You have to pay attention to the amounts, because a certain amount over 3 weeks can increase blood pressure. If you have a hypotensive patient, it might be a good call. So sometimes I have a patient with this pattern and they're hypertensive, and so then I'm working to find the right blend of supplements so they're not getting licorice. So it just depends. So I described the pattern, which I've already told you. I told you on the summary page. And to sort of summarize, actually, let me go through one more sheet and then I'll tell you the rest of what I told her. So Dutch runs a few organic acids, which is nice. We will do an organic acid test. I use Great Plains most often. Genova also has a good one. I'm sure there's others. And I didn't have that test for this patient. We determined it wasn't needed. So we're always trying to get as few tests as possible, depending on symptoms and how they present. So this isn't a complete organic acid test, but there's a few that you pick up. Methylmalonic acid, if that's high, can be a sign of low vitamin B12. Same with the vitamin B6 metabolites. If they're high, can be a sign of low B6. She was below range for glutathione. And based on that preference for the 4-hydroxy pathway, I did give, I'm pretty sure I gave her some support. Yeah, I had enough stuff in. I wrote it as a note for next time, depending on the reactions. But NAC is an easy one to put in. She was the low end of dopamine. Her melatonin's fine. Oxidative stress was fine. Okay, so just to summarize the rest of this test for her, I shared about glutathione marker being low, along with dopamine low normal. We talked about the slight favor of the 5A reductase and watching for acne around chin, greasy hair, irritability, especially as we choose to supplement. Started with low dose DHEA, may bring in the bioidentical estrogens. Talked about the cortisol pattern and the preference for the active cortisol and not cortisone. Suggested considering phosphatidylserine in the evening, and depending on the signs and symptoms, thought about bringing adrenatone in at lunchtime. So specific to that dip in the afternoon. All right, so just to say what I actually did end up giving her relative to that test. I gave phosphatidylserine, which I'm a big fan of, and there's a couple different versions. The labs, the supplement companies I use most often for it are Biotics and Designs for Health. In fact, I have the Biotics one right here. So that's Biotics, phosphatidylserine. And then the Designs for Health one is called PS150 phosphatidylserine. Used to be made from brain. We don't do that anymore. Mad cow disease and all. So, so now it's like sunflower. This one's a soy lecithin. I like the I tend to use the Designs for Health one. That's a non-soy one, so I use that more often. Let me show you real quick before, let me say what I finished doing, and then I want to show you one more thing on the treatment guide before we jump out of this test. So phosphatidylserine, I was having her take 2 to 3 in the evening after dinner, specifically trying to support lowering this cortisol response at night. One of the things phosphatidylserine is great for. And if they don't get exhausted, so some people, I remember I did this myself, but some people, that cortisol response is so high at night that when they first take phosphatidylserine, it's almost like a sleep aid. They're just out. Now that may go away, but if that works, then just keep it in the evening and it can help support sleep. Great. But for those that don't have, whoops, I still have to admit people. For those who don't have an issue with it making them sleepy, and if they're really high stress all day, then they can take it throughout the day. I had a crazy week. It doesn't make me sleepy anymore, so that's why it's on my desk. I took it all day during the week. What else was I going to say about that? Oh, I've had a few patients that felt it helped them have less brain fog so much they took it earlier in the day. I remember one just saying like she just felt like it cleared up and she can think clearer. And there's some evidence people using it in Alzheimer's and dementia patients. So you can experiment with that. I gave her Pharma Gaba, which I probably have. Yeah. This gives you an idea what my week was like. So there's Pharma Gaba. I love Pharma Gaba. I use it in many different forms. And so I was having her use Chew 2 any time of day and even at night just to wind down and see how she responds. She also had racing thoughts at night. So sometimes I have patients test it. It can be great with tachycardia. It can be great with racing or ruminating thoughts. And especially with patients with tachycardia, I'll have them test it when they are not having that happen. So they see what it feels like. So they sort of know, and then test it when they get the tachycardia. And is there a change? Or those with high blood pressure, that's another trick, because if their high blood pressure is from an emotional or an adrenal root cause, then they can start making that connection. If they have a home blood pressure cuff, their blood pressure is high, take a couple Pharma Gaba, wait a few minutes, and then take it again. So just sort of empowering them to start making these changes. And then I gave the DHEA 5 milligrams, just 1 per day, with the instructions, so she didn't have to wait for another visit, that if her energy did not improve in the first 2 weeks and there was no signs of, chin acne, greasy hair, it was okay to go up to 2 a day. Still 10 milligrams is relatively low. Okay, so before we jump out, that's what I chose to do. This page on the guide, page 13, I did not give progesterone and estrogen, but if I had, which would be the sort of the next step I'd go, I'm thinking of what I was going to give. We're right in like sort of a moderate dose is what I'd be using. A low progesterone, but a low to moderate dose of estrogen. And then DHEA is what I started with. You can see at 5 milligrams, I was in the low category. And even if she ends up taking 2 a day, that's common. It's not very high. Those of you who do lots of hormone replacement therapy, there's some good information here, including monitoring it. And if you go to the Dutch website and get in there to the practitioner training, they actually have some helpful videos about, like, if you like the estradiol patch, if you're using testosterone pellets, which I'm really not a fan of, but maybe you are and you get great success with it. I just usually see people on the other side where they got it done at, not with a typical physician's office or those of us doing functional medicine, but sort of like, I don't know what you call them now, like these trendy little spas. And I usually see them on the other side where they went in just because they were tired, right? Or they had low libido, and then they end up with this huge hormone imbalance. So my bias comes from that. Let's see, anything else I wanted to show you on that? I think that was mostly it. Testosterone, so if you can see here on the right, low testosterone or high testosterone symptoms. So these high testosterone symptoms, that's what I'm saying if I'm doing a supplement and I want to make sure, like, how is the body metabolizing it? How are we going down this pathway? I'm just, so much about patients is managing expectations, right? And then empowering them to know what's going on. So if you're on one extreme or the other, they're not freaking out. I also personally find with hormones that just a little nudge in one direction or another can have a big impact. A little bit more information about testosterone for women. And then it starts, you have a little grid, so that's lovely. They pair DHEA with it. So like if you have normal testosterone, but DHEA is normal, is lower, then they'll talk about supplementing that. If it's high, like you're getting high testosterone, some of these footnotes are very helpful. And then you can use your favorite supplement line. So like one of the footnotes here, first footnote 4 is talking about ways to get DHEA and common dose. So you've got that. Some of the suppositories are great. We'll recommend suppositories too. So, and there's a supplemental version, I don't prescribe, so I'm always using a natural version, but I'll co-manage with some of my colleagues, and we're trying to avoid synthetics whenever possible, particularly progestins. All right, if 5A reductase is too high, see footnote number 5, saw palmetto, that's what I use the most often, and always telling the women, like, why am I giving you a supplement called Prostate Supreme? But I've seen great results with that if I need to knock down a high estrogen in a female. Here's some blood sugar supplementation, which I'm sure you're familiar of, number 6. And then let's see, where was footnote number 7? Where is the example for it? I don't see it. Maybe you see it in there. Yeah, I don't see it. Oh, there it is. Very high testosterone. Okay, so what they're recommending, I was like, what are they recommending there? They're recommending precursors. Some of them are precursors to be able to make more progesterone, to try to bring it in balance that way. The Vitex, white peony, and then some are liver support, and then just adrenal support overall. Consider PCOS, of course. All right, let's see. Anything else I wanted to show you? Then we get into men. Let's go back to the beginning of this. So the actual, they should have switched the order. The actual test itself goes over sex hormones, then the adrenal, cortisol, etc. But the treatment booklet lists it first. So I'll just show you this first part. Here's cortisol symptoms, high and low. And again, sometimes people can have both depending on the time of day and what's going on. Look at their grid. This is a nice little reference chart here on page 5. Addison's and Cushing's, you can pick up here and see it. And then we've found it before, and then order the traditional blood labs. It's just not that common to see it. This is a little grid as far as root causes, so that can be helpful when you're getting to the bottom of everything. And then here's a little grid, just like we did for the sex hormones, for the cortisol. So you can see low cortisol or low adaptive, some of the adrenal adaptogens. Some of you are going to use corticosteroid medications, but it's just rare that people are that out of balance. Let's see, light exposure, yeah, somewhere in here. Oh, there's your licorice that I was talking about. So you're going to see that. And then if it's high, the biggest things are lifestyle. So reducing, I'm going to show you patient number 2. We had to giggle about it together because hers was so high. but reduce inflammation, stress, see if there's any hidden infection, meditation, prayer, GABA, which I used, 5-HTP, L-theanine. I use those often too, particularly in nighttime formulas if they need to sleep or people with mood issues. I use passion flower, skullcap a lot. Phosphatidylserine, obviously I used in this case. Maca I don't use as often sometimes. You might love it. I've just seen people have reverse reactions to it. And then all the adaptogen support. There's one formula I like in particular, especially when people have immune issues, which did I give it to her? No, I wrote it down to consider for next time. So one of the things I'll do is when I'm already thinking through these things with a patient, I will decide what I'm doing now, but I will write the things I was thinking for next time because I don't want to rethink it. And then it just reminds me quickly. So one of the things I was thinking of was Hepatotone Plus by Designs for Health, which has cordyceps in it and schizandra. What else is in there? I think milk thistle. It's just sort of a nice immune liver blend. So that was one of the things that I had written down. Okay, so I just wanted you to see that grid. So that was it for her on the Dutch. The lab, by the way, if I keep going, the lab gives you some like boilerplate information, and the stuff in bold, first of all, you get the whole chart. I never go over this with a patient. They would hate me. But if you want to map it all out, there you go. And this is helpful, like it's sideways right now, but this is helpful to print and maybe have by your desk because the lab did do you a favor, which is like, see, turn your head sideways. See, she's favoring the 4-hydroxy, and it's talking about one of the SNPs that can be problematic. It's talking about inflammation and smoke. It's talking about how to boost the 2-hydroxy E1 pathway, cruciferous veggies, DIM, things like that. So you get, thank you for putting that in. You get some tips right here, just at a snapshot. So that's lovely. There's all their references for the lab. Here's their clinical support overview, which I think is pretty generic. And then in bold will be information about your specific patient. It continues for some reason, there's 8 more pages of it. For some reason, this was broken apart. So here's the rest of it. It's normally all one file. So most of this is just boilerplate and then just a little bit of information about your specific patient. But mostly you'd be sort of uninformed if you just stayed with this because it's just not that great information. So the treatment guide is much more helpful. Okay, so there's that. And Polly, thank you for sharing that link. Okay, so let's jump to the intestinal barrier test next. If I can get it to show. Stop freaking out. Let me just, maybe I'll close it and reopen it. See how it's like not letting me grab it? All right. Let's just reopen it. So this is patient number 1. All right, I'm gonna stop my screen share for a second, just because it's freaking out. Oh, and now I get to see all of you. So nice to see you. I'm just gonna close all of those. And we'll try again. Okay, now we've got it. If you can just let me know once I screen share that you can see it. So, all right, it should be shared now. And let me just, sorry, I have to open chat back up or I can't see. Okay, thank you. Appreciate the feedback. Okay, so this test, and if I need to zoom in or something, tell me, but otherwise I think it's pretty big. There's several different tests for intestinal barrier issues. I've used so many of them. I just like this one, even though it costs a little bit more because of the specific markers it has. So I'll show you that why. And the thing I like, I love it when I can get like a GI map or some stool where I get the snapshot in the colon and I'm getting a blood test, seeing what's going through the bloodstream. I love seeing both sides. Don't always get it, but with this patient, I had it. So there's not a lot of markers to this. It's an easy test to read. I don't order it all the time, but when I feel it's needed, it's helpful. And the lab actually provides very good notes. So zonulin, she's borderline high. So zonulin is a protein that helps with the, integrity of the gut barrier, the lining. And so when it gets elevated, it can be a sign of leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability. It's not a perfect marker because sometimes people have it and it's not high, but this was in the bloodstream. I do consider it positive. You can also measure it in stool. I don't do it as often in stool. I tend to use other ones, and why make people pay for an extra marker? Diamine oxidase, she's sufficient, but she's definitely low normal. So DAO is the enzyme that breaks down histamine. I like being able to see that. And histamine, cost and insurance coverage. What is the cost for this? I think in our office, it's $412. And that's based on all the fees, like credit card fees, and we go through an outside lab company, their fees and whatnot. The cheapest you can get it, I believe, is around maybe $300 cash. You can get insurance to cover it. So depending on the license you have and for ordering and whether you find you get coverage or not. This lab recently rebranded. They're known as Dunwoody. I've used their intestinal barrier test for years, so I like it. But they did a special. It's still going on right now because they rebranded. I wish they would just keep it all the time, but it's been nice. We've been able to pass the savings on to patients. They basically let you get this test and the allergy one, which I'm going to show you. That was the snapshot I sort of flew by earlier. 2 for the price of 1. So if you're still, we're about to close. We're in our last week, so we're only offering it through the 18th. But if you're, open through December, you can get that. So that's quite a bit of savings, and it's lovely to see them together. Okay, so histamine, she's high in histamine, and I've had patients, oh my gosh, I've had patients where it was just 10, 20 times normal. So the worst combination would be high zonulin, very low DAO, and high histamine, right? And you might even get in a histamine intolerant state. This is just what I would consider like a leaky gut and allergenic state, which will make more sense as we look at the other test. And then this is just a calculated ratio doing the math between these two. And so she's in that borderline low range, obviously because her histamine's elevated. And then I love seeing these lipopolysaccharides. So lipopolysaccharides are the endotoxin released by gram-negative bacteria. We're going to look at the GI map, so that will make more sense. There should always be some lipopolysaccharides in the bloodstream, not necessarily a high amount, but a normal range because we get exposed to bacteria all the time, right? So there is a clinical significance when it's low, and you can see she's low in 2 of them. And then look at how high she is on her IgG lipopolysaccharides. So again, this will make more sense when you see the GI map. But this is a sign of leaky gut, right? The endotoxin from the overgrowth in the colon getting across that barrier and getting into the bloodstream. And then you have great notes from it. So the lab will talk about the significance of high zonulin, talk a bit about histamine intolerance, some of the symptoms where you see high histamine. You'll have additional notes, including high histamine foods to avoid, DAO. So sometimes I'll supplement with DAO. It can be hard to get a good DAO supplement. The one I use is from Zymogen, and I don't do it that often. It's pricey, but like I talked last time, I had a patient of mine, actually another physician, who would have this huge histamine response to food and actually rashes all over her body. And this was one of the tests we did besides getting at the root cause of everything. And so she had very high histamine, very low DAO. So we did supplement with DAO in that case. And she uses it ongoing. This gets into the significance of high lipopolysaccharides and some of the conditions associated with that. And, you know, from the IFM perspective, and I certainly agree with everything I've seen with patients and all the research I've written, you know, autoimmune conditions have that 3-step process, right? A genetic predisposition, which isn't a guarantee that they're going to get it, but certainly sets them up for more susceptibility. And then step 2, an environmental trigger or a trigger of some source. It could be a gluten allergy. It could be high stress. It could be glyphosate toxicity. It could be, I don't know, so many things, right? I actually have a class I taught. I went through this in detail for practitioners, and some beautiful graphics of all of the things that play a role there. And then step 3, leaky gut, right? Intestinal barrier issues, because it's one thing to have this like unfavorable metabolic environment and these overgrowths, either pathogens or opportunistic bacteria in the colon. But then when it gets into the bloodstream, this is what I call an autoimmune state. And, you know, docs will talk about how you get one autoimmune condition, there's such a high probability of getting another. And in a patient's mind, it's like they got an autoimmune condition and it's like contagious and it jumps from organ to organ. And I'm trying to explain to them, no, it's really a reflection of your health as a whole in this autoimmune state. And then if you have these increased lipopolysaccharides racing around your bloodstream, well, we know that the thyroid and the adrenal glands, 2 tiny glands, but they actually have like the most blood supply per square footage, right? They're important organs, important endocrine glands, high blood supply. So if you're in an autoimmune state, is it surprising that so many people get diagnosed with these autoimmune thyroid conditions because it has such a high blood supply? Why wouldn't it take a hit, right? So anyway, you can see here some of the conditions associated with elevated lipopolysaccharides. And then low lipopolysaccharides, like I was telling you, the clinical significance, because having a low immune, it signifies a low immune response because there's some always present. And so we don't expect it to be low. So they may need immunoglobulin support. And if you read that communication guide I gave you, which is a really awesome tool if you ever want me to show you how to use it more, like we use it all the time. I'm biased, I created it, but I love it. But I talked a little bit about my story. And so I was diagnosed with a primary immunodeficiency, CVID, which you may be familiar with. And I had to go and get human immunoglobulins, IVIG, every 3 weeks. And it costs over $700,000 a year. I was declared permanently disabled, could never work in healthcare again, never be around kids. It's just really sucky period of life. And that's how I got into functional medicine. And I haven't had that treatment in 5 years now. I still, my CVID didn't magically go away. Although I love it. My immunologist is like, what you're doing doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, no, it really does. It's just the functional medicine approach, but I get to live a life. I still have to be mindful of immune health, right? But I get to live a life. Anyway, I have a lot of personal experience and with patients of the Ivig therapy, which is a blood product from humans and so expensive because of how many humans it takes to make it. Like the nurses in the infusion center, you know, how they would carry it. Because dropping it could be like a $42,000 loss, right? But we have supplements that will give immunoglobulin support. One is colostrum, like I use Tegracell colostrum by Designs for Health. Biotics has an immunoglobulin product. There's many other companies that do, but that is a dairy product. So sometimes I don't want that for patients, but and I'll describe to them, just like a breastfeeding mother, they're advised to nurse their baby, you know, all the way completely through one breast to get to the hind milk, right? That colostrum and the immunoglobulin. So I'm trying to give them the same version, but a bovine version. But the supplement manufacturers came out with SBI, which is serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins. It's a blood product. So for those where you need a dairy-free option, that can be a great option. So I use Mega IgG 2000 by Microbiome Labs. There's more than one supplement with that name, so you have to make sure you're getting the right one. And that is an SBI with IgG, IgM, and IgA. And I use orthomolecular SBI Protect, which is an IgG product. And then we're going to look at the GI map in a minute here, and you'll see SIG-A. So sometimes you can do immunoglobulin support for SIG-A, or also Saccharomyces boulardii has been known, non-pathogenic yeast, has been shown to increase SIG-A. All right, a few more notes from the lab about these low levels and the significance. And then the high levels, I just think they do a lovely job of giving you quick, easy information. And I had a patient this week, it wasn't this one, but she had the pattern of the high IgM and low IgG, which can indicate poor seroconversion. And I did give immunoglobulin support in that case. And there's some of the references. Okay, so there's that lab. I have to reopen these because my computer freaked out. So we looked at that. And so just to summarize, I'm thinking, I didn't give her DAO, but I did write a note, like if I need to, I'll pick it up later. So I put that in my like notes for next visit. Do I want to grab DAO? But I didn't put it in now. We had enough to do. I did give her Histamine, which I might have, yeah, right there. I use like 1,000 different supplements, so I haven't used them all personally, but I do try as much as possible to test everything before using it with people. So this is a nice blend. I like it a lot, and it has nettle and quercetin in it, and a couple other ingredients. So I recommended Histamine two times a day to begin with, just to help lower the histamine, the elevated histamine a bit. And I gave her GI Revive. GI Revive is a blend also by Designs for Health that has many ingredients in it to support gut lining. It does have glutamine in it, which is so good for gut lining, but there's some people that they'll take glutamine, you know, glutamine and GABA are on the opposite sides, right? And so glutamine, some people will make glutamic acid, and now you're getting into an excitotoxin. And so if I know someone has that pattern, then I won't use that supplement, or I won't use glutamine in general, and try to work on that. But otherwise, I like GI Revive. It just has so much in one. I see it work well often. The downside to it is because it's a blend with so many ingredients, if they're going to take capsules, they have to have 7 capsules a day, but they also have a powder version. So I'll just describe it to them. I'm recommending this. And if you're okay with the powder, 1 scoop a day. If you prefer capsules, it's 7 a day to get the therapeutic dose. And if I give someone GABA, which is typically very, very calming for people, and they like talk about allergies, and now like I feel like I'm getting allergies. If they have an opposite reaction to GABA, like it should be very calming, and they're getting you know, irritated or anxiety is increasing, then that's usually they're driving down that pathway to make glutamic acid. Okay, so Histaese and GI Revive was all I gave her. And then of course I wanted to look at the allergies because I expected to see some because has high histamine. And sure enough, here we go. So same lab, and she did this because of the symptoms she was presenting with, and also being able to take advantage of getting 2 for the price of 1, which was lovely. Okay, so here's the summary page, and I'll zoom out a bit, but let me just start here. And I want to show you one other thing at the same time. I'll see if I can separate this so you can see it side by side. I like the notes this lab gives. Not every lab does a good job, but I think they do a good job. So this is their allergy guide. I actually give this to patients. And I think it's very thorough. It answers a lot of questions. And you can get this right from their website, or if you want, I'm happy to email it to you. And talks about, you know, the different markers, IgE, a true food allergy, the IgG, the complement component, the significance of the IgG4. We'll talk a little bit about that. Talks about some of the conditions associated with the C3D elevation. If you're doing like a CBC with differential, you can see if eosinophils are elevated. And if they're having throat pain, you might have eosinophilic esophagitis. Talking about the blocking potential, I'll get into that. I just want to, stroll through this with you. Some of the conditions associated. What else? The precision that they use for their testing. The more restrictive versus less restrictive diets, I'll cover that for you. And gluten, wheat, mold, some of the cross-reactivity. So that's lovely if you start seeing certain trends. They may have some environmental cross-reactivity. And talking about yeast coming back, it's almost like a little bonus that they're doing candida and mold in here. It's like you're getting an extra test. And then what else? I think they have some, they show you like certain markers that come up, the foods that are highest in it. It's really a lovely guide. You can see why I just give it to patients too. But if you are interested in this type of test and you want to learn more, and then there's their references and whatnot. Okay, so let's come back to the test. If I need to zoom in more, tell me, otherwise I'm going to stay here. So the first couple columns are the true allergies, IgE obviously, and you can see black pepper, which she says she uses all the time. We're cutting that out for sure. Her body is not liking black pepper. The IgE allergies might not go away. It is possible that, you know, these are testing as true IgE allergies. It's possible that with everything that's going on with her body being out of balance, you're about to see the GI map, and, you know, leaky gut and high histamine, especially if there were a ton of these. There's 2 pages to the summary, so I'll show you both. But I was thinking of another patient I had this week that had so many IgE allergies, and usually don't have that many. Like she had like 25 high IgE allergies. In that case, you know, doing some protocols and then retesting makes sense to me. Otherwise, most of the time, you don't really need a retest. And the high, by the way, is the top 5% of reactivity. Moderate is the top 20% of reactivity. So those are considered true allergies. Now, IgG, this column here under sensitivity, that's what most food testing does. And that's why I wasn't always a huge fan in the beginning. Like sometimes I thought it was a waste of money if we hadn't done some work identifying what was going on and going after, you know, gut barrier health to begin with. Because you'd come up for a lot of stuff, right? If you just had leaky gut and you were sort of inflamed, this column would be, it would just come up high. You'd react to things that weren't really you know, weren't a real food sensitivity. You were just sort of irritated as a whole. And she definitely has more of those. But this other patient I was talking about, she had very few IgG sensitivities and just the IgE was through the roof. It was very interesting in the conversation because once she saw the test, she didn't expect to see much on it. And she then revealed that she had been itchy her whole life, itchy to the point where she would scratch herself and it would look like welts, like she had been whipped. None of that was disclosed until we actually had the test. Okay, so this is the food sensitivity section. Now, IgG4 is broken out a little bit differently. And elevated IgG4 can be problematic by itself, but also the body can use it as a protective mechanism to block. So beef is an example here for her. Banana is an example. It can use to block a more true IgE or potential anaphylactic response to a food. So that's why you see these green yeses and it's under the true allergy section. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes down for this patient after we do some protocols and whether we need to retest or not and what happens. And there's more notes on that in there, or you can ask me questions about it. The C3D, not every lab does that. I like that they do that. This is part of the complement, you know, innate immune response. And when it shows up, it can make the IgG response 1,000 to 10,000 times worse. As a whole, IgE allergy is usually an immediate response. It's not always anaphylactic. That's what we think of, you know, needing an EpiPen, but sometimes it's like immediate, like tingling around the lips or swollen tongue or throat or itchy, could be anaphylactic. And the IgE can continue for 1 to 2 days after exposure. The IgG tends to be a farther downstream, less extreme reaction, but still producing inflammation. And the initial response could show like 30 minutes to an hour after eating up to 4 days later, which is important because if you're going to do an elimination diet, it's going to be important for how you reintroduce foods. So let's just talk about that very briefly. So I know there's other practitioners and doctors in here, but for those that are in IFM and your members, you've got access to that toolbox, which is so beautiful. If you use a general elimination diet, and IFM has like a short elimination diet guide front and back. It has a comprehensive guide, very thorough. I give that to patients too. It has a like a planning, meal plan, recipes, grocery shopping list, all of that's lovely. And that cuts out the top 7 allergens. If you have a test like this, then you'll do an elimination diet, but now you get to customize it and cut out the exact foods that they are high in. Like if you're going to do a more restrictive diet with this patient, you would cut out almonds, but the standard elimination diet does not cut out almonds, nor does it cut out black pepper, right? And then I was just trying to see if there's something else. Yeah, she does have a moderate response to casein. Anyway, so about 23 days, another IFM test question, about 23 days after cutting these foods out, you will have cleared the half-life of the IgE and IgG from the serum. So that's why most elimination diets are 30 days. I'll try to get my patients that are motivated to go 6 weeks or even 2 months. I mean, if we're going to do this and it's tedious, let's just clear it all. That's my thought. If they're whining and moaning and they don't want to do it, then fine. But if most of them are gung-ho and they're like, I will cut those foods out for 6 weeks. And then the reintroduction, you know, you can always retest, but then you have to pay for a test or you have to rebill for the test. There's actually a lot of good evidence and also clinical experience of using elimination diet. It's highly effective when you do reintroduction correctly. It's just tedious. It's specific. You have to be disciplined. And so I always try to get patients to focus on the foods they can eat, enjoy them, go to town. Don't focus on what you can't, because I don't want it that at the end of their month or 6 weeks or whatever, it's the first day they're reintroducing foods and they're eating cheeseburgers and, you know, 5 potential allergens all at once. We'll never know what's hitting them. So I want them to be specific. And so IFM has a great tool called the Food Reintroduction Journal, which I might be able to show you a flash of. My computer's being weird, so I'm not going to mess with it right now. But basically, you just print a sheet, and it has 4 columns, day 1, 2, 3, and 4. And let's say she was going to start with, she'd done her 6 weeks. She's going to reintroduce almonds. She would have almonds like maybe for lunch on day 1. And then it lists categories, you know, are there skin issues? Are there mood changes? Are there bowel changes? Things to remind the patient, because they're not thinking that it's related, right? But inflammation can show up in so many different ways. And then if there's no reaction on day 1, I have them eat it again on day 2, and they're still charting it. And then no reaction, we just wait for day 3 and we wait for day 4. So you wait those whole 4 days, because if it's not an IgE response and it's just an IgG, it's possible that they ate it on day 1, day 2, and they're not having a response till day 4. But if they get all the way to the day 4, no response, that food's back in their diet, print the sheet again, reintroduce the next food. So if someone's going to do a restrictive diet and they have a very long list, it's going to take months to reintroduce it all. And some people say, I'd just rather redo the test. But it's free to do that if they're willing to take the time and effort. Okay, I just zoomed out so you can see the page as a whole. And then this is page 2. So let me just keep going here. This is the less restrictive diet. So it just removes the things that are really problematic. It's lovely that the lab gives you this and you don't have to, you know, think it and mark it all. And so these were the worst. Now, she came up for aspergillus. And by the way, I think Candida, it was there, but it wasn't as bad. But remember, she had some symptoms. Recurring UTIs, yeast infections, itchy ears, right? Some food cravings. So there was some sign that there might be a fungal overgrowth. Okay, so this is the least restrictive. She just cuts those out. She eats everything in the green, enjoy. And then the these moderate foods here in the yellow, she can still eat them, but only once every 3 days, just not to increase the inflammation. Or she could do the more restrictive diet. You can see how long of a list that is. And her choice was she was going to start with the least restrictive, because she'd just done a bunch of grocery shopping. And then as soon as she ran out of that foods, she was going to move into the more restrictive. So that was what she chose to do. But eat the green all you want, rotate the yellows. And then when she's reintroducing foods, it's going to take some time because she's going to reintroduce them slowly. And I encourage her to go by the least reactive versus the most reactive. So there's that test. This is IgE and IgG4 exposure, so true allergy exposure. So you can start looking for trends. And sometimes you'll see trends that have you think, oh, there's some environmental allergies, or maybe, you know, oh, she's really having a hard time, it seems like, digesting proteins. Maybe I'm going to dig more into her digestion and things like that. And then the same thing, it just goes on and on, but I already went through the summary, so you get the idea. Okay, last thing for this patient. Oh, and let me tell you before I went on. So I told you for her what I recommended for hormones. I told you what I recommended, histamine and the leaky gut support. And then what else did I give? I did give Immunotone Plus because she was also sort of dealing with some sicky issues. I gave a digestive aid and then a couple other things that will make sense when you look more at the next test. Oh, I know what else I gave for this. I gave Colorex. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's red leaf horopedo out of New Zealand. I love their products, and I can't remember what the name of the company is, but Colorex, K-O-L-O-R-E-X. They have an intimate wash and a topical cream that are so helpful to use, and they can use it in the shower. I'll also use, they have capsules, I'll also use Colorex internally. Okay, last thing for her is the GI map. So here's her GI map, and then let me also just show you the interpretive guide. I sent this out. I'm going to put it over here. And you can just find it online, but they have a lovely interpretive guide with details, how to read the report. This is a DNA quantitative PCR test, which is great because, like, page 1, this is usually the only things you can get the hospital to order, and but it's not quantitative. So unless they're truly high, they're not going to get a flag. Whereas because this is quantitative, if it's present but not high, you'll see it. I really like this test. I've used it a lot. This is a helpful grid on page 8. They've got the 5R protocol, same as IFM teaches, and then lists many different supplemental ingredients. And those who prescribe antibiotics, they're actually in this guide too. So helpful. I don't prescribe antibiotics. If we need them, I refer. But we have a lot of success using antimicrobials. And we also use phages, which is what I chose to use with this particular patient. If you're not familiar with phages, they used to be popular before antibiotics. And then we discovered antibiotics, which are wonderful, but we sort of overdid it. And phages are everywhere, one of the oldest things on earth. Pick up a drop of water, you're going to have tons of phages in it. And phages are sort of interesting with the virus that we talk about this now, but it's a virus. And it affects bacteria, but will not hurt human cells. And the specific product I used had 4 well-studied phages in it that are particularly helpful for E. coli. So that's why we went with that. So after, I'll go through this test with you, but I gave her Digestzymes, which is a good digestive aid, in my opinion, in my experience, with betaine hydrochloride, pancreatic enzymes, and ox bile salts. And I gave ProbioPhage, which has 4 phages in it and 5 probiotics. And then I did high dose probiotics, 250 billion CFUs. And you can see here, so this is the Entero hemorrhagic E. coli. So you can see the notes. Here it is right here from the lab, how they're getting it, fecal contamination. It can be implicated in HUS, hemolytic uremic syndrome. So sometimes antibiotics are contraindicated because of that, because it can initiate the HUS. Compare it to calprotectin and Sig-A. We're going to look at that. Consider high dose probiotics. We included all those. So anyway, that was the response. So usually I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here so you can see this whole page. So hopefully that's okay for you. But usually you don't want to see anything on page 1. So less than DL, less than detectable levels. And sometimes, by the way, sometimes insurance will pay for this test too. So those of you that bill insurance, we've had pretty good success with billing insurance with this one. One thing that's nice about this, not every lab does this, but you know how some, if you do a cash rate for a patient, it's much lower. And then if you bill insurance, and they don't pay, the patient gets stuck with a higher bill. This lab doesn't do that. I like that. So if you're going to bill insurance and it won't be covered, they're not going to pay any more than they would have paid for the cash rate. So you sort of have nothing to lose. Okay, so these are the real nasties, the true pathogens. On page 2, she came up for H. pylori, and oh, Dr. Smith, I see, you know, I am not good at billing, just so you know, because our office is mostly cash. So we just give a super bill. But it was like 20 years ago that I used to take like insurance seminars and had an insurance practice. So I just don't stay current in it at all. But what I will tell you is that every lab, including this one, they will give you like typical trends for those who are billing. ICD-10 codes, CPT codes. So I would just ask each lab for what they use. And that's what we typically do. The digestive aid I like to use a lot is Digestzymes, which I take myself. And I've used tons of them. I'm like, how do I make this? Everything's backwards. So I just have really, really good success with this, but I've used a lot of them. I know there's good ones out there. I just like that one because it has everything all in one. If I need extra fat metabolism, I will use LVGB, liver gallbladder by Designs for Health, which works really well. And like if they're having floating stools or a greasy stool, or you're going to see on here their steatocrit is high, or they're getting loose stools, it just works very well. And you're getting some of that liver support. It's going to improve the bile production and like a thinner, more useful bile. Okay, so H. pylori, you can see the sections here. I should go fast because I wanted to, I was going to show you one main thing on patient 2. We'll mostly just do patient 1, but I use this test so much and I teach it to other practitioners so often. Okay, so H. pylori, they'll say 50% of people are just chronic carriers. I don't believe that. I think 50% look like chronic carriers because they're low in stomach acid. You know, some people have a true overproduction of acid, but far less than we think. PPIs have been overprescribed. Now research is published on how to deprescribe PPIs. That's not our license. We don't do it, but what I'll do is I'll give the IFM PPI guide so they can work with their prescribing practitioner and wean off it slowly. And we'll pick up our end of it, which is all the lifestyle diet and supplementation. What most people are doing is they have low stomach acid, they eat, they're not able to properly break down their food. It sits there and rots essentially, and that produces acids. The esophagus doesn't care why the acid is there, where it comes from. Was it an overproduction of acid, or was it yucky food, or do they have a hiatal hernia? You know, whatever it is, it just hurts. We're not supposed to have acid in the esophagus. But in the patient's mind, it's always, I have too much. And so then they'll take Tums or do something to dampen it, and they'll feel better in the moment. But if it's really because they have hypochlorhydria, then it's just going to perpetuate the problem. And we have good research now that shows the connection between hypochlorhydria, low stomach acid, and H. pylori overgrowth, and SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. That's something our office does a lot of work on all the time. So yeah, Digestzymes is Designs for Health. Okay, so H. pylori, it was present. It wasn't high. I'm not giving anything specific for it. I'm just sort of wrapping it in with everything I'm thinking of. If it gets high enough, it will trigger the virulence factors being run, which is very helpful because less than 2% of H. pylori cases can, increase that risk, or, H. pylori is most famous for ulcers, can be causing stomach cancers, but usually you'll see a virulence factor showing up. So it's not that common. I only see it a few times. One time specifically, I did have to refer out and we were able to catch it. More often when we get to calprotectin, I've had to refer out for colonoscopy and catch colon cancer. So I love this test. honestly, I think it should be routine, but that's my bias. Okay, here's the normal bacterial flora section. She actually looks good, but a lot of times you'll see things come up, and here's the section where you can read more about it, particularly Akkermansia and the fecal bacterium. If you get less than DL, you know, what you saw on the first page, and you don't see it there at all, that's a problem associated with obesity. You can read it right in here. Low levels associated with obesity and metabolic dysfunction. It's a keystone species. High is also a problem. It can be associated with multiple sclerosis. I see it high a fair amount of time with people with leaky gut. Part of its job is to degrade the mucus and recycle, and it's related to the metabolism of the microbiome as a whole. The fecal bacterium is also a keystone species and a major butyrate producer. And so sometimes when people are really low in that, I might actually give butyrate. And then it tells you low levels associated with a wide range of chronic inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. The phyla that dominates your GI tract, nose to tail. Any imbalance here is a sign of dysbiosis. If the Firmicutes is high relative to the Bacteroidetes, you'll see this ratio climb up, and that's associated with insulin resistance, obesity, and actually increased caloric extraction from food. So a little bit of a pisser, but one of the things that, you know, keep us chubby, right? Okay, opportunistic bacteria. You can scroll down on the guide, and there's your opportunistic bacteria. That's your short view. You'll see more. And the whole first half of this page is opportunistic bacteria, but the lab divides it into two sections. And the competitors did this one, by the way. I've used them all, and I'm a geek enough that, sorry, TMI, this is sort of disgusting, but I've used the same stool samples and tested GI map against Genova and against doctor's data. And there's pros and cons to all of them. I just really like this test the best. I like their markers, and I think it has the best value for the patient. Sometimes Genova's looks cheaper to start with, and I use many of their other tests, but they have so many markers stripped out, and then by the time you put it back in, it always costs more. They do have a 3-day option though. This is a single stool test, the single day sample. Okay, so Bacillus, you have to ask, because if you're giving soil-based probiotics, a lot of those use Bacillus strain, so it may be elevated because of a probiotic, a soil-based probiotic. Otherwise, it is in soil, it's abundant, and if someone's going to get overgrown, that's a common one. Pseudomonas are particularly nasty. Staph everywhere can get overgrown. Strep loves mucous membranes. The Methanobacteriaceae family, that includes like Methanobrevirbacter smithi, what is implicated in constipation quite a bit. And we measure that in gas form. It's not really a bacteria, it's an archaea. And we've learned more stuff about it over the years, like for one, that it can feed itself, and that it actually does a pretty good job of getting from the colon to the small intestines on its own. But if you use a SIBO breath test, you know, they're drinking lactulose or glucose, and then you're measuring hydrogen and methane production. And now there's a new test, so you can measure hydrogen sulfide also, called TrioSmart. So that just came out maybe in the last month. So those of you that work with a lot of SIBO patients, that can be fun. Does Diagnostic Solutions offer phone consulting? I believe so. I think every lab does. If you, those of you who know, I designed a lab software analysis. It's not released yet because I'm going through the final proof of it. It just has thousands and thousands of pieces of data, but most of these tests I've showed you are in it. It's extremely low cost. I built it for myself, but then I finally made it so other practitioners could use it. We just do so many labs. You have to be efficient, or it's a pain, right? And so this way, a staff member can just enter in the numbers and print a PDF, and you can compare like 150 blood markers to SIBO breath tests to stool testing, GI map, to Dutch hormone testing, to intestinal barrier testing, organic acid tests, urinalysis. So yeah, I built the first one 4.5 years ago, and it was just blood. And then in the last year, we built everything else. So it's going to be really cool. All right. If I have your email, I'll let you know at some point, or just go to doczachary.com and I'll announce it when it's released there, but probably about 2 months. Okay. So one thing to notice about this, again, the hospitals don't run this because they're not paying attention to overgrowth. If it's not like a pathogen, they're like dysbiosis, whatever. But those of us in functional medicine know this is a real deal. And a lot of these can get overgrown because of slow motility. So constipation, poor digestion, hypochlorhydria, or, SIBO. And then sometimes when they get overgrown, the particular bacteria will produce loose stools. And some, like this Pseudomonas, will produce toxins that damage cells, actually. And then the methane is most implicated in constipation. So sometimes you've got that IBS mixed patient, right, where they're having symptoms of alternating constipation and diarrhea. You wonder why. You start to get some answers. This whole test, by the way, when I tell patients, it's dysbiosis, right? That general term for when things get out of balance. This is just confirmation of dysbiosis. But the lovely thing about the test is now you get to see exactly what it is. And then the lab breaks these potential, this is still opportunistic bacteria, but it breaks it into a different section because we have additional evidence that this bacteria is known to, and I'm quoting the lab, initiate and sustain the autoimmune conditions. And so for her, I know she has leaky gut. She's got this high histamine. We saw some stuff that was going on hormone-wise. So I'm going to be more mindful of this Klebsiella overgrowth because I'm assuming it's getting into her bloodstream. So I'm more concerned about it. And you can see Klebsiella here. It's a gram-negative bacteria. What was she high in? Lipopolysaccharides, IgG. So Klebsiella, the endotoxin, it's like the protective mechanism for the bacteria, right? It wants to live. It doesn't want to be gone. I describe it to the patients like a skunk with the stinky smell, or a turtle with a hard shell. So it releases lipopolysaccharides. So this is how we start to put all the pieces together. Another thing I'll tell patients when we're doing this work is like, those in natural medicine or those that do homeopathy, they used to talk about like a Herx response, and some thought it was a myth and some said it's real. Why do people get worse before they get better? Well, now we know not only is it not a myth, it's not even a Herx response. What it is if you're going to kill something off, they already release endotoxins or some type of endotoxin. You kill them off, they're going to release more. And Candida is great for that. I describe it as having a 7-act Shakespearean death scene where we'll kill them off, but they just don't go quietly into the night. And so I'm really trying to empower patients to have control over the rate at which we do this work. And I'm talking to them about things being too easy or too hard. So I expect some change. I expect some days to be better than others. I expect some bowel change. Things can be in flux, but it should, all be moving towards a better direction. If I'm making some recommendations and it's so easy they notice nothing, I want them to reach out to me because maybe I need to give them a biofilm buster. Maybe some of these critters are in biofilms and they're hiding against the body's natural defenses and they're hiding against the supplements or the antibiotics. If it's too hard and they're like living in the bathroom and they're miserable and they feel like they have the flu every day, then either we're going too fast and we need to ratchet it down, or they're like the worst thing you could do is start to kill some stuff off and they're constipated. You get an autotoxemia, like they need to be pooping. Or some of these endotoxins still involve the liver, right? Maybe they have maybe they have fatty liver, or they have liver congestion, or maybe their phase 2 detoxification has issues, and so they can't detoxify properly. So maybe we need to slow it down or half the dose or take a break, or I'm going to give them a binder. Like sometimes I'll use bentonite clay and charcoal, very short term, very limited amount, but sometimes high dose nettle, like someone has a negative reaction like this, high dose nettle, and then a little bit of bentonite clay and charcoal can be amazing. And some of these people would get these, it would take them down for like 3 weeks, and now we might shorten it to like 2 hours. So big difference. Okay, additional notes on that are where? Hang on one second. I'm going to grab that question. I just want to show you. Oh, here. So page 24 of the little lab guide, it talks about these bacteria may trigger or sustain the autoimmune process. And then you have some additional notes on some of the autoimmune conditions associated with that opportunistic bacteria. And again, it doesn't mean like for sure someone's going to get rheumatoid arthritis, but it just means they took a certain population of patients with rheumatoid arthritis, looked back, and found a significant number had, Citrobacter overgrowth. Do I tend to focus on liver phase 2 or binders if patients get skin rashes while detoxifying? Yes. Yes, but I'd also look at histamine. So with this patient, I already put something in to support histamine to begin with because I saw it was elevated from that leaky gut test. Okay, fungus and yeast here. It's not that common that you get it on a stool test. So if that's your only way to test for fungus and yeast, you're going to be a little disappointed because it can colonize and hide in the stool. Sometimes it's not in the lumen of the gut and it's in the lining. And then Candida's, it's so persistent in my experience, and it can go everywhere. So I find that the organic acid test, the urine metabolite test, is the most sensitive for Candida, particularly the Rabinose marker. That's my experience. If I see it here on a patient, I assume it's everywhere. The viruses, most adults have already been exposed or had Epstein-Barr virus. This will only show if there's a current active infection. Page 4, it will test for some protozoa and worms. These aren't like the pathogenic parasites, Giardia on page 1. So some of these you'll see here. Let me get over there. Some are considered asymptomatic, or it could be a sign of dysbiosis as a whole. So you just want to always look at it collectively. But I've had patients who had a number of parasites, and then the rest of their test was a hot mess. And so in that case, I might give them a blend like GI Microbe X, where it has some antimicrobials, antifungal, and antiparasitic all in one. Why not just pick that one up, right? This gives you some news on the specific parasites, worms. I've seen worms like twice. It's just not that common that I see it. And then the intestinal health section, I think, is very valuable information because in my mind, it gives you a snapshot into how is this really impacting this patient? Like what's going on? So for her, steatocrit, no issues. But in your patients with fatty stool fatty stool, you'll see it higher. And sometimes people with fatty liver, because that fatty liver is impacting liver function as a whole and bile production. So you may see that elevated, or sometimes the patient who describes like, I had to wipe a lot. I go to the bathroom, I'm getting loose stools, or I have a stool and I just have to spend 10 minutes wiping. You'll see this elevated. Elastase 1, that is a marker made specific to the pancreas. So it's a nice sort of like insight into pancreatic function. Here's the little grid here. You only get flagged if they're below 200, which is really insufficient production. So I will address it if they're between 200 to 500, that's deficient. This person has enough. I can just tell you from doing hundreds and hundreds of these that typical is 1,500 to 2,500, but it's considered normal at 500 above. So yeah, if someone was 300, I might supplement, but that's why I use the digest slimes. I sort of get it all done in one. Beta-glucuronidase is the enzyme made by the bacterial overgrowth. I like to see it 400 or less. If people get to 1,000, I might consider supplementing if this the symptoms seem significant. If it's high, I'm certainly considering it more. Sometimes it's thousands elevated. And beta-glucuronidase, per the lab, causes a unfavorable metabolic environment in the colon, but it also interferes with phase 2 detoxification in the liver, particularly of estrogen. So with this patient, I was putting all of that together, right? We already saw she is not driving down that 2-hydroxy pathway. She's going down the 4-hydroxy. And that's part of why I chose FemGuard for her, because a little bit softer, gentler, you know, hormone balance to start, but also it had some calcium D-glucarate in it. So calcium D-glucarate is like one of the main things you'd reach for if beta-glucuronidase was elevated. Sometimes that's helpful too. If you work with a lot of cancer patients and they have an estrogen-driven cancer, that can be a helpful way to make sure estrogen's staying lower or that it's clearing. All right, so here on the right, you can see beta-glucuronidase. Here's some of the main producers of the beta-glucuronidase. So of course, the root cause of it being elevated is to drive down the bacteria and address the dysbiosis and normalize it. She has high E. coli, so we're handling that. This talks about some of the issues here and how to address it. Milk thistle, calcium D-glucarate, especially if taking hormone replacement. And then SIG-A. So secretory immunoglobulin A, SIG-A. Oops, I skipped occult blood. I'll come back to that. Secretory immunoglobulin A, that's your first line of defense in your mucous membrane. So not just in your GI tract, but also like in your lungs and your throat, right? Nose. Here's the notes on it. When it's elevated, it's an activated immune response. So that means her E. coli that we saw on the first page, more likely to be a newer infection. Will I send out the recording? Yes, assuming I do a good job recording it. I'm not the most tech savvy, but the plan is yes, I will absolutely send it out. Happy to help. I love teaching. It's fun. Okay, so, and talking shop. I'm hoping one of these times when you guys get on here, we'll just like all unmute and chat. That'll be so fun. Oh, thank you, Dr. Smith. I appreciate it. Okay, so when I see SIG-A high like that, of course I'm paying attention, but I think of it as more of an acute issue. A lot of times we see it low. For me, that's a sign, obviously not just what the lab says, the gut immune system is suppressed, yes, but I tend to see that like it's been an ongoing series of dysbiosis or gut infections and the body just isn't able to get the upper hand. So I have caught some primary immunodeficiencies. I am more sensitive to it because I have it myself, but the lowest SIG-A I've ever seen was 27. It's like, what? That is so low. So I ran a full immunoglobulin panel and they did have a primary immunodeficiency. It's an inexpensive panel just to see total immunoglobulins. Interestingly enough, some people will just be low in IgE, which isn't that common. You usually see IgE high. I found it in a family, also medical practitioners, and some of the grandchildren. So it looked like there was possibly a genetic tendency, but there's some research I had found on PubMed that when IgE is low, especially in these young children, they're more prone to getting allergies. And anyway, it was just interesting to be able to work across multiple generations. But most of the time, if IgA is low, it's a couple hundred, and then I may give Saccharomyces boulardii. If there's not a dairy issue, I might use colostrum, or I might use the direct immunoglobulins like an SBI. Now this anti-gliadin immunoglobulin A, I love seeing this here. I always tell the patients, like, you're never going to be happy that I'm going to tell you this. This patient was also having issues. I'm pretty sure, let's see. I looked at so many. Sometimes they start to blur. Yeah, look at her response to gluten. Okay, so same person. This is why I love when you do report of findings and you have multiple tests and you can put them all together. So we spent 90 minutes going over this together. And of course, reported findings always caught. That's like the most expensive thing for a patient in our office, but a lot of work goes into it. All follow-up visits cost a lot less. But she had a high true IgE allergy to gluten, and then this moderate IgG4 response, IgG, and an elevated complement response. So then is it surprising that she's forming antibodies to gliadin in her colon? This does not mean celiac. It would probably be a good idea to get the true celiac blood test for her. And if they came up positive, possibly consider an endoscopy or colonoscopy. But otherwise, there's certainly plenty of evidence, in my opinion, to completely cut out gluten. And of course, gliadin is in some other foods too, which is why, by the way, this allergy test will test gluten, but also test wheat. And she didn't have a response really to wheat, a little bit of inflammation, but some people are allergic to wheat and they're testing the other proteins and components of wheat that don't include gluten, right? Anyway, but no gluten for this mama. But what I'm trying to say to her is, in this case, she's having an elevated immune response because of the infection. Like, let's direct all activity to her body to handle that infection. I often see people who are low and then this anti-gliadin's high. And what I say is, we're low and everyone's aware of immune health right now. And like, let's try to just have our bodies be as well armed as possible. So if they were low, I describe it as like the National Guard, and only half of the team showed up. So then if they're low and they're on alert and ready to take care of this patient, and then they eat some gluten, it's like they have to take part of that already reduced team and say, okay, I need to go handle this gluten here. And that's not helpful, right? Let's not do that. Sort of a wasted response. Plus, we want to digest food. We don't want to have an immune response to food. And we're learning more and more about this. It's fascinating. A cheap test is, a CBC with differential, and you can see little clues in a CBC with differential, like monocytes, which turn to macrophages in the tissues. Sometimes monocytes will be elevated. And most docs don't pay any attention to that, but that can be an early clue of, oh, there might be an infection somewhere, commonly a GI infection or dysbiosis. Or if white blood cells are not extremely low, like they're extremely low, we're thinking something serious. If they're slightly low, like functionally low and chronically low, what's going on? Well, the body's so creative that sometimes if there's hypochlorhydria or insufficient digestion, it will even use white blood cells as a digestive aid, which is clever. But again, we don't want an immune response to food, and you're seeing an immune response to food. And gluten bothers everyone. Like it's an irritating protein, but someone who doesn't have dysbiosis and can handle gluten, their bacteria will handle it, and that's how they consume it. From our research, we do see that even in healthy people, gluten will cause leaky gut temporarily. And then they digest it, the bacteria handles it, they're good. This kind of person, not able to do it, it's going to perpetuate that leaky gut problem. But again, we're having an immune response. So it's just not something I encourage. But this is, as far as we know, a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Her calprotectin, it's in normal range. So calprotectin is one of the most studied inflammation markers in the stool worldwide. We have thousands of research articles about it. And if you're 49 or below, what research shows us is that it's statistically impossible to have inflammatory bowel disease. So very unlikely for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I do see patients when it's elevated. So let me jump back up to the occult blood fit. Microscopic blood in the stool. Most of the time, if it's there, they just like had a hemorrhoid or something, right? But I've had patients where their calprotectin was greatly elevated and occult blood, and I was referring them out, colonoscopy stat. And more than once we've caught cancer. One time in particular, I was thinking of, the surgeon said, go back and give that office a hug, because had we waited until the standard age for you to get a colonoscopy, you wouldn't have made it. So it was literally a life-saving procedure. I will tell you, within 5 minutes of saying that, that patient was also complaining about her weight. So it's like, I'm not sure she got the whole concept, but the surgeon was able to remove all the cancer. So that was good. So those are good markers, but I have seen calprotectin very, very elevated, and it's just from this mess you'll see on previous pages. And hers wasn't as severe. I see some that are far worse. And my approach then is if the blood is in normal and the calprotectin is high, I'm willing to do some protocols with them, but they must retest that calprotectin within a month or two. And if it goes down, then I'm fine. If not, we're doing a referral. Because colonoscopies, it's a great test, but it can also be overdone. It's not without risk. And a lot of MDs are using a newer standard now, which I think is great. They won't do a whole GI map by any means, but they will do the occult blood fit and calprotectin. And if that comes back normal and there's no first degree relative with colon cancer and there's no previous colonoscopy with, big polyps or abnormal biopsy, they will say, you're fine. You can skip a colonoscopy this year. We'll see you next year. And they repeat the occult blood fit and the calprotectin. If it comes back normal again, year after year, that's great. That's a very non-invasive way to handle it. But then if it's abnormal, get them in, right? Because they have to go under, and sometimes there's bowel perforation. Most of the time it's fine, but again, it tends to get a little overdone. And then the last piece here is antibiotic resistant genes. These were not tested because although H. pylori was present, it wasn't high enough to trigger the response. But if it does, it's helpful because if you are going to prescribe an antibiotic, you'll see if there's if they're resistant to amoxicillin. So sometimes we'll see that also. So I'm just going to recap what I recommended. I'm going to show you one other thing that I thought was sort of funny. And then if there's any questions, I'll take them. Okay, so total recommendations for her. And just to recap findings, we did all the hormone stuff. You saw that. We saw the leaky gut issues, the high lipopolysaccharides in the blood, the multiple food allergies, and we just went over the GI map. And she did have the E. coli pathogen. H. pylori was present, and she had some elevated autoimmune opportunistic bacteria. And then, of course, this high Sig-A, right? So I gave her Digestzymes, digestive aid. I gave her Immunotome Plus, which has a blend of immune support, so you can look at that. I gave her the probiophage, the phages, and the high-dose probiotics. I gave her histamine for the elevated histamine, and then the leaky gut support in the form of GI Revive. For the stress and the hormones, we did phosphatidylserine in the evening, Pharma Gaba to use as needed, DHEA just 5 milligrams once a day. If not enough of a difference, could increase up to 10 milligrams, and FemGuard Balance. I did give Ferroshell, very low dose, well-tolerated iron due to the anemia. I gave the Colorex Intimate Wash and Cream, which I see such good results about. I also gave, I'll show you one more thing, I didn't mention it, but this Fusobacterium that's high, and I think the Klebsiella too, they tend to be higher in the mouth, right? So the mouth is the start of your GI tract, but it's also a microbiome in itself. And I can't remember if the Klebsiella is one of that. Yeah, it's a common resident in the oral cavity and respiratory tract. So what I did was I gave a peribiotic toothpaste. So it's mint flavored. It has that dental lac, that good strain. It's like a probiotic for the mouth. So brush with it, spit, but don't rinse, and use it at night. And that's a little bit like a probiotic all night. So that's all I gave, and relatively low dose, but a number of different bottles. That was certainly enough to have to work on. Diet, lifestyle changes. And then depending on the response, I just wrote notes for myself. We can consider bioidenticals. I can step up the DimAvail. I can bring in calcium D-glucarate if needed. I have a little bit, but I could do a higher dose. I'm doing a fraction of what I would normally use. I could bring in DAO, that Hepatotone Plus, that liver support, and then GI Microbe X if I need an additional kill agent. Sometimes I give 2, but there was just enough going on. So that's why I didn't do that. All right, one last thing I'll show you real quick. I was going to go through it in more detail, but maybe another time. Let's see, patient 2, Dutch. I just wanted to show this, and the patient and I had a good laugh about it, because what are you going to do? She works a really high stress job, and I was joking she could show this to her boss. She is in menopause, but this, I was just going to show the cortisol range. You know how her cortisol was so high that the lab had to squish down the range in order to get her on the graph. So that was the part we were laughing about together. So she's definitely stressed. I mean, she's high all the way through, but you can see how high she is in the morning. So if you remember the previous patient, this high range black was about up here on the grid. And then you can see, just look at, you know, from 2,700 to 6,500 for the range of metabolized cortisol, and she's approaching 12,000. So anyway, there was a lot there. Okay, that was 2 hours. We did a ton. Thank you for everyone hanging in there. Any other questions that you have right now? You can type it in or unmute yourself. And if not, I'll just save the video link and send it out. Give my staff a couple days to figure it out. Glad you liked it. Thank you. To get on my list, if you gave me your email, I'll try to save it. But if you want to like opt in, go to doczachary.com, and there's a free resource. That's that communication guide. I'll just show you what it looks like real quick. And then I saw there was another question. I'll answer it. But then that'll open up. That would be on a list. I don't really do like a bunch of marketing stuff at all, but when I announce the release of the software app, that's when I will. This is the PDF. I tried to email it to you guys, but it was a bit of a big file. So that's why I gave the list. So, but can you hear me now? That's my story I was telling you about. But this talks about communicating with patients, because again, like managing expectations, that's everything, isn't it? So this is a personality profiling system. You might like, you know, some other system, Myers-Briggs, whatever. But they're not, I was actually the first one in the world to create a visual one. Now Myers-Briggs has characters too. But they weren't easy, like INFJ or whatever it was. It wasn't easy to say. So we needed something that like you could see people or you could hear people on the phone. So I created it. It was published by McGraw-Hill out of New York in 2012. The book's much more detailed, but honestly, I gave you all the key things here. So if you wanted the details, you'd get the book, but this is free, just grab it. And it tells you each sort of personality type and how they work. You can take a quiz if you want. You don't really need to. I mean, you'll learn plenty there, but if you want a quiz, there it is. There's the score sheet. If you're going to take the quiz, don't look at the score sheet first so you don't bias your answers. But here's the good information. Like, what are the driving needs with people? Like the ones that need certainty, they have trust issues. Like this is going to show up in your practice with them. And then this section, this has never been published before, so I'm just giving this out. But this is how practitioner communicating to patients. So if your patient is that class president style and they have trust issues, their greatest fear is that they're going to be dependent on you as the practitioner or your technique or supplement. They don't want that. And their avoidance technique is to limit disappointment and remain skeptical. You know who they are. Like you tell them stuff and they're like, really? If something goes wrong, they're going to blame themselves for making a poor choice in choosing you or that test or that supplement, or they're going to blame themselves for being vulnerable. If they get really upset, their fighting response is to yell, make accusations, and they fight to be right. So don't ever like fight to be right with the class president, just let them be right. Their knee-jerk reaction is I'm done or I'm out of here. What they need to be heard, you take ownership for any part of yours, hold them accountable. They like tight boundaries, reassure them you're here to stay, you're not going anywhere. And here's the stealth technique. This is the part that's golden. If you can make them laugh, great, you'll win them over, or just be more upset than they are. If they're upset with your office because, you know, your nurse did not call them back in time or whatever, get more upset. And they're going to be like, oh, it's okay, doc. It's not that bad. So anyway, so I did that for each personality type. That part I think is golden. And then this is the software that tells you about the software labs. So if you go to doczachary.com, you can get that. And then let's see, what were some of your favorite learning resources when you're starting out in functional med? Well, I started out as a patient. I wasn't even practicing anymore. My license is as a DC like 20 years ago, and I had a completely different career. I had stopped practicing due to an injury from a car accident, had a completely different career, and I got terribly sick, and I had to leave that career. That's when I published the book, right? Was in that last career. And so, so my first resources, like I felt like I read all of PubMed, honestly. I was trying to figure out what was going on with myself. Why did I get sick? I spent 3 years researching that and solving it because I was on permanent disability. I had 7 doctors. I was on 8 prescriptions, and I was sleeping like 22 hours a day. I was sick as a dog. So the prognosis was not good. So that was my motivation, was to figure that out. And then from there, I started taking single classes. And then IFM, I love IFM. Their courses are wonderful. I'm really glad, quite honestly, that I took them later. Like I had already been in practice as a functional medicine doctor for years before I took IFM. I think it would be a little like drinking from the fire hose to take it in the beginning. So definitely found it easier doing it that way. So yeah, I just took a lot of courses one-on-one. I created a class, I think I listed in here. Yeah. Functional Medicine Academy. It's a shorter series, and it's based on like sort of what we did today. Like, what does it take to like read a test, go over some symptoms, and use it on Monday? If I was going to teach everything, there's no need to do that. IFM does a great job. Why compete with them? They have such thorough knowledge. So this was really like marketing secrets, communication, clinical practice, paperwork, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, and Functional Medicine Academy, I was teaching it through a training company. They had the exclusive license to my courses, but they did not survive COVID because we're in California and you can't have any gatherings. And they always taught their classes in big groups to like 150 doctors at one time. So I'm going to redo those classes and just launch them online sometime next year. But yeah, it's just fun, good stuff to teach. And the marketing one, a lot of people don't know. And that was my last career, so I folded a bunch of that in. But yeah, those are the resources. The blood lab that I built and the other labs, the reason I built that is because when I first started doing it, I had to use 5 different textbooks and resources. I couldn't find it all in one place, and it just took too long. So that's why I did it. And then I couldn't find any that brought in these other tests. And I'm sure I'll just keep adding tests because the tests are wonderful, but you have to be efficient. So that's the problem with it. All right. Any other questions? Thank you, guys. Fun to be on. I'm taking a break for the rest of December. Yay. But we are, if you're interested in like functional medicine, like how to market to patients, you might want to watch what we do in January. This is a class series we're doing. It's not for practitioners, although practitioners always go through it, but this is, we do a body love challenge. It'll be our 11th one. And so I rebranded it because of what's going on with the quarantine and everything, but these are our classes. So if you want to see some of how we communicate with patients, you're certainly welcome to spy on that. So I'll be back in January and be very busy and somehow finding time to finish the software stuff. But otherwise, that's it. Reach out any other time if you have questions and I'll try to catch them. But yeah, if you don't hear from me the end of December, it's just because I'm taking a little bit of time off. All right, I'm going to sign off since there aren't any more questions. Thank you all so much. Bye.